Hey folks, this is Rhykker, and we learned this week that one dev on Helldivers 2 pretty much has the coolest job in the video game industry. And it's resulting in a unique experience for players. We'll talk about that, but we'll also dive into some other news. Okay, come on, I had to. We'll dive into some other topics too. It's been a redemption week for indie game servers, but the industry continues to suffer from layoffs. This has led to the cancellation of some cool-sounding games at Sony. Meanwhile, Nintendo is suing someone who is technically not doing anything illegal. We'll talk about that in a bit. But before we dive into our topics, now I just want to say Helldive every time, a quick word from this video's sponsor, Last Epoch. Y'all know that I've been hyping this game up since its crowdfunding phase in 2018. Last Epoch finally launched out of early access last week. I've always said how much potential the game has, and it did not disappoint. It's an excellent addition to the ARPG scene. The devs have brought some fantastic ideas to improve some key ARPG systems, like the active skill system in this game is by far my favorite of any ARPG. They built an individual skill tree for literally every skill. It's full of meaningful choices to make. You get to sync points into different nodes, getting a sense of getting stronger, while also tailoring your skills to your playstyle. Two builds using the same skill can feel totally different. It's just the gold standard for ARPG skill systems. But there's more to love. Itemization and crafting is deep and well executed. Their trade system is genius, and it appeals to players who both do and don't want to trade. The endgame is a solid foundation to build on, and they're already planning on expanding it. So go give Last Epoch a look on Steam. It's a steal at $35 for one of the best ARPGs you can dive into. Alright, now let's start off with some Elden Ring news. We got some new information on the upcoming expansion, Shadow of the Erdtree, thanks to an interview that game director Hidetaki Miyazaki did with Famitsu. A lot of players have been talking about whether they want to take a fresh character into the DLC or bring in their most maxed out, fully kitted character. Well, according to Miyazaki, the expansion will include a leveling element, similar to that seen in Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. Basically, you'll have a separate level up mechanic that only works and empowers you while you are in the DLC area. In Sekiro, you have something called attack power, which just straight up makes you deal more damage and more damage the further you progress into the game. So Miyazaki said that if you are stuck on a boss in Shadow of the Erdtree, for example, you can go back, do side content in the DLC area to become stronger before returning. So this suggests that Shadow of the Erdtree might be something that you can work into a regular playthrough of the game rather than have to wait to finish the game or finish your character, since it won't overlevel you for the rest of the base content. Again, you won't be able to bring that attack power or whatever they call it outside of the DLC area. This also means that if you bring in a full endgame character, you probably won't have to hit all the side content to power up before beating the bosses. But depending on how they scale whatever attack power that you do get, there's probably some expectation that you do have to get some of it, and you can't just crush all the content with an endgame character. Just my speculation though. How do you folks think it'll work? And be sure to check out last week's video as well, where we did a deep dive on speculating about the expansion and covering everything that we know about Shadow of the Erdtree so far. In other news, Last Epoch hit an all-time peak of 265,000 concurrent players, and server issues have been largely resolved at this point. We also got patch 1.0.1 this week, with some bug fixes and minor changes, and game director Judd also gave us an update on future plans. For patch 1.1, coming in the future, they want to expand the endgame monolith system. They want to bring new itemization options, more boss content, class and balance updates, campaign content too, since the story isn't over yet, and there will be a focus on bringing pinnacle content for 1.1 specifically. Basically really difficult, aspirational content. We'll be learning more about all that in the not too distant future apparently, with the patch itself coming with the first cycle. That's their version of seasons, and that's going to start in about 3 to 4 months. Also, the devs have stated that they do plan to release on console in the future. I keep getting asked whether this game is on console or coming to console. Yes, but in the future. And in case you haven't seen them folks, I have a video on the best starter builds for Last Epoch to help you pick a class and a mastery, as well as the best endgame builds. but I do encourage folks to explore the game at your own pace. Then in some quick Diablo 4 news, this week we had the Campfire Chat talking about the patch that is hitting next week on Tuesday, releasing the Gauntlet leaderboard activity as well as some balance changes. We go over all that in this video here, be sure to check that out. But what I'm most happy about was to learn that Season 4 will be getting a PTR test server so that we can try out the changes to itemization before they go live. This is a huge win. Then in some Helldivers 2 news, after raising the servers to support over 800,000 concurrent players, the team finally had a great weekend last week. The servers behaved, everyone was able to play, and now the dev team can focus on improving the game rather than fixing the servers. And this week we learned an interesting tidbit about the game's ongoing narrative. The team revealed that there's a single dev named Joel who holds the title of Game Master, and he has been pulling the strings on the major events shaping the meta campaign that players partake in. In case you don't know, Helldivers 2 has a sort of story that everyone is playing through. All players receive major orders to follow, orders that every player everywhere contributes to. It's a community goal, and once those orders are complete, then new orders are issued. So if the goal is to conquer a planet, then every mission that you do on that planet contributes a bit to the overall success of the mission. And once enough players contribute sufficiently, the mission is a success, and then we move on to the next narrative beat. And again, this isn't individual people progressing the story on their own. The entire story progresses for everyone at the same time. Now, the team does have some set pieces that they've planned for the story, as in fixed things that will happen at some point. Outside of that, though, player behavior is apparently strongly determining how the story evolves and will continue to do so. And Game Master Joel is the one reacting to that player behavior. So for instance, one goal, to conquer a planet, was proving too easy. I guess they didn't realize how many people would be playing. The game was super popular, so progress towards the goal was going way too fast. So Joel literally got up in the middle of the night to go send in some more enemies to cause trouble in the opposite end of the galaxy, forcing players to now react to this new threat and slowing down their progress on the main goal. But Joel isn't just there to mess with players. Once, for instance, when players freed some planets faster than expected, he figured, okay, well, what happens when a planet is conquered? Next step is to start mining, right? So to represent that, incendiary mines as an item were made freely available for all players for 24 hours. It was a reward that Joel thought up that figured it was grounded in cause and effect, verisimilitude of the world. I love this idea. I always wanted to see games make use of these meta narratives that would be guided by community involvement. I pushed for an idea like this for Diablo 4 years ago, and I think Joel has a super cool job, but that just might be the D&D DM in me. However, I do think the devs have made one crucial mistake here. By calling out Joel specifically by name, now, if the community of players are unhappy by any turn of events, they will take out their wrath on poor Joel. Unless the devs are pulling a 400 IQ move and there actually is no Joel, then they just made up like this fake employee for the community to direct their anger towards, then that's a big brain move. In other news, it's more bad news for the gaming industry. More layoffs. I'm not going to be covering all layoffs at every studio from now on. It's just gotten... There's too many at this point, and it's too depressing. But a big one this week, Sony laying off 900 employees worldwide, representing about 8% of its global workforce. Their London studio is shutting down entirely, and Insomniac, Naughty Dog, Guerrilla, and Firesprite, they're all said to be hit with downsizing. And as part of the layoffs, a Twisted Metal live service game has been cancelled. On one hand, I'm sad because, you know, Twisted Metal was cool back in the day, right? But then, live service. This was a title said to be in the works by Firesprite, and allegedly it was very early in production, however. But combine that news with the news that the Last of Us live service game got cancelled a few weeks ago, it's looking like Sony may be abandoning the whole games as a service model that they seem to be gearing towards. Then, in some Nintendo news, the gaming giant is suing the creators of a popular emulator of the Nintendo Switch known as Yuzu. And this is noteworthy because emulators are not illegal in and of themselves. What's illegal is pirating a game. Yuzu does not distribute ROMs. They don't give you free games. They're not engaged in piracy themselves. All Yuzu does is allow you to run Nintendo Switch games on your PC. Whether you've pirated those games or you own them legally, that's not their concern. They're just the software that facilitates running it, and that by itself is not illegal. However, the angle that Nintendo seems to be taking here in their lawsuit is that Yuzu is illegally circumventing their software encryption and is facilitating piracy. Sort of aiding and abetting, I guess. Nintendo is seeking damages and for Yuzu to be shut down. And there's a couple things here that are working against Yuzu. First, they have a Patreon page. In order to access the emulator, you gotta pay a monthly fee. And if you look at their stats over time around the release of Breath of the Wild, that Patreon page jumped from earning about $6,000 a month to $40,000 a month. Numbers did drop down after that, but then when Tears of the Kingdom released, once again we saw a jump to $40,000 a month. The second thing working against them is the fact that Tears of the Kingdom leaked a week early. Nintendo claims that 1 million copies of the game were downloaded prior to the game's release, and that during this time, Yuzu's Patreon support doubled to 40,000. By the time that Tears of the Kingdom launched, anyone who wanted to had already pirated the game and was running it at 4K resolution, 60 FPS on their PC. The implication being that this actively harmed sales of the title. So Nintendo's strategy here is probably to prove that Yuzu is directly profiting off piracy, and likely doing so knowingly. And if Yuzu wants to fight Nintendo in court, that's gonna cost a lot of money. Oftentimes when you see these big entities like Nintendo come after people, whether it's private servers, whether it's emulators, whether it's piracy, whether it's modders, rolling over and giving up generally is the only option, because who has the money for a long drawn-out court battle against a company that has effectively infinite wealth for this kind of thing? Now you may wonder why Nintendo is targeting an emulator rather than actually targeting the sites distributing the pirated games. Why go after the emulator and not the pirates? And the reason likely is because piracy is just difficult to stop. You shut down one piracy site, another one opens up in another country. But emulators are difficult to make, difficult to maintain. There's a lot of legitimate use for emulators, but if you shut them down, then it suddenly becomes a whole lot more difficult to play pirated games. At least pirated console games. And what's the point of pirating a game if you can't run it? Then in other Nintendo news, the still-to-be-revealed console that we're calling the Switch 2 has been delayed to March 2025. Yeah, before it's even been unveiled, it's already being delayed. And this is according to a report by Japanese news outlet Nikkei. The original plan allegedly was to launch in late 2024, but in order to avoid shortages of stock, they're pushing that back a couple months to March. We're calling it the Switch 2 because it reportedly will be another hybrid portable home device, but what the actual name will be is still to be revealed. Yes, it will suck to have to wait a little bit longer and not be able to get your Nintendo Switch 2 for Christmas. The fact is, most people would have had to wait longer anyway, because we've consistently seen scalpers come around, buy up the stock of a new console, and then try to price gouge consumers. So at least now, by waiting beyond that time when everyone is buying up consoles, you know, Q4, people have extra money to spend because it's Christmas time, and giving more time to have more consoles to sell. Overall, this is going to be a better situation for consumers. Then in other news, the creative director for the next Battlefield game, Marcus Lato, left EA this week, which was shocking given EA basically built a whole studio for him, Ridgeline Games, to make this game. He had joined EA after the launch of Battlefield 2042, and since Ridge Games' founding in 2022, they've been working on a narrative campaign set in the Battlefield universe, and this was supposed to be part of a big restructuring of the franchise. The idea was to reimagine Battlefield as a more story-driven kind of game. Well, it soon became evident why Marcus left. News broke that EA was cutting 5% of its workforce, about 670 people, and this included the complete shutdown of Ridgeline Games. Before they ever even got to release a game, already shut down. Some devs are being sent to Ripple Effect. That's one of the companies that worked on Battlefield 2042. Criterion Games, another of the studios that helped with 2042, they're now going to be overseeing single-player work on Battlefield going forward. But that wasn't the only casualty of EA's layoffs. No, a Star Wars FPS that Respawn was working on has been cancelled. And it was rumored to feature a Mandalorian, so yeah. This is why we just can't have nice things. Every time it sounds like there's going to be some really cool Star Wars game, it just gets canceled. EA did confirm that work on a next Jedi game, however, will continue, as well as work on a Black Panther and Iron Man game. Part of these shakeups is apparently because EA sees a rapid shift towards large open-world games, massive communities, and live service games. Which... I'm sorry, what? We just had Sony moving away from live service games. Are you downloading your news off a 56K modem? This shift to live service happened years ago. You're late to the party here. In other news, according to Kotaku's sources, Gearbox, developers of Borderlands, will soon enough no longer be under Embracer Group, the company that had gobbled up a bunch of studios, then began mass layoffs in recent months. Gearbox will be sold to another entity, but we have no details yet on who that may be. We know that 2K publishes a lot of their games, and 2K is owned by Take-Two Interactive, so maybe Take-Two made an offer? Then lastly, yesterday, Moon Studios, developers of Ori, revealed new details of their take on the ARPG, No Rest for the Wicked. And I got to reveal the reason for my Euro trip earlier in the month, earlier in February, I guess we're March now, because they invited me to their Vienna studio to try out the game and interview the studio founders. In fact, technically Moon Studios co-founder Thomas Mahler had reached out to me years ago to share a prototype and get my thoughts, and it's great to finally see this game brought to the public. Thomas and Gennady, the co-founders, they speak with such passion and have so many interesting thoughts on the ARPG. And I know a lot of people are going to look at the game and say, this does not look like Diablo, this looks like Dark Souls. But this did truly come from a place of wanting to make their version of where they wanted the genre to go from Diablo 2. You talk to these guys, there's no question that they loved Diablo 2, they loved Diablo 1, they loved the ARPG, and this is just their vision of it, and it might not match what the ARPG evolved into, and that's why they wanted to do their own thing. And that thing may seem a lot like Dark Souls to a lot of us, and you know what, I imagine for Dark Souls players, there's probably stuff in there that feels very Diablo as well, because when it comes time to the random loot, the itemization, the random affixes on gear, that system-wise all starts to lean more towards ARPG, but yes, combat itself feels much more Souls-like. I put up a video yesterday with my playthrough of a pre-early access build, during which I'm also interviewing Thomas, and he shares his thoughts on hot ARPG topics like loot filters, trade, crafting, map overlays, itemization, affixes, all that. I encourage you folks, check out the video, because I guarantee you that you're going to hear a lot of things that he says that are going to resonate with you. I'll also have another video coming out next week that's a full interview with Thomas and Gennady that hits even more details. And that's going to wrap up this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Thanks to my supporters for making these videos possible, and subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders for more gaming content.